Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. And we want, like for you all, thank you for joining us. We want you all to follow us on Facebook and YouTube at the front line with Joe and Joe. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Hit the little bell. We're told that that means a lot as far as the algorithm is concerned on YouTube. And again, we thank you all for being here for a very important topic. As many of you know, we had a video that went viral, got about 280,000 views, where I was standing in front of St. Francis Xavier Church while the statue of Christopher Columbus was coming down. This was back at the end of June. Now, Christopher Columbus has come under tremendous attack recently in this current wave of iconoclasm that's sweeping the United States. We decided that we were going to bring in someone who's done extensive research into Columbus in order to set the record straight about the man, his mission, his contributions, his legacy. So we'd like to welcome to the show Ernie Nuzzo, who has produced a thesis that truly gets to the heart of the matter by debunking many of the prevalent myths surrounding Columbus. And just by way of a brief introduction, Ernie is a graduate of both Rutgers University and Rutgers University School of Law, and has been a practicing attorney for over 50 years. He's a member of the New Jersey Bar Association. Amongst his activities and affiliations are, he's the founder and president of the Ramsey, New Jersey Taxpayer Association. He's the trustee and secretary of the Bergen Columbians. He's wearing the t-shirt right now, a 501c3 Italian-American charitable organization. He is the Italian-American Man of, or has received the Italian-American Man of the Year Award from the New Jersey Tribune. He's a lecturer, a professor, and an author. And as I mentioned earlier, he has written a thesis regarding the topic we're going to be discussing today, which is setting the record straight on Christopher Columbus. Ernie Nuzzo, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Nice to be with you.
All right.
Just one little change. One little change. These are essays, not a thesis. If it were a thesis, it would be 5 times as thick.
All right.
It really synthesizes essay form. Thesis is with more detail than even I have. Okay.
So with that, let's first and foremost, let's get into, before we get into all the meat and potatoes about the essay itself, is talk a little bit about racism. Racism as it pertains to this topic. Racism as it pertains to obviously Columbus, because that's the theme that's going on out there. That's the central reason, central, not the only, the central reason why statues have to come down. We saw that in West Orange. We saw that in Newark. We saw that in 2 places in Newark. Talk first of all, Ernie, and lay a little foundation about racism right now and how it's seen in America as it pertains to Christopher Columbus.
Well, I think that racism isn't the reason. Racism is the excuse. That these people would be burning buildings and pulling statues down if they had a predicate which would justify their icon. You could use iconoclast. I consider them to be narcissistic, nihilist, but Christopher Columbus is probably, of all the people that are being attacked, he's probably the person who least deserves to be attacked, because there's so many things about Columbus that has nothing to do with race. One of the principal tenets of our essay is racism was invented. Racism is an invention that occurred after he was dead. He can't have done it when he wasn't alive yet. He was dead. So let's just talk about a little bit about the background and how he got to it. Columbus, as you know, was a Genoese, not an Italian. Italy didn't exist yet. It didn't exist until 1860. And he was a well-known navigator, sailor, who had an idea. The idea was, and he wasn't the first one to think it out, but he was the first person to really act on it. If I sail due west, I'm going to hit the Indies. I'm going to hit China. He didn't know at the time that he was going to hit something a lot bigger, and right in between, it's called North America and South America. So he peddled that for years. He peddled it to the King of England, to the King of Portugal. I don't remember right now. I even think to Holland, and he ended up twice expressing his ideas to the King and Queen of Castile, because Spain didn't yet exist, but you could say Spain, and eventually they went along with underwriting him. By the way, a part of it was financed by him and by private people. It wasn't just the King and Queen of Spain. That's a lot of little interesting details that are like bon mots, but really don't affect the issue of racism. But his idea was to do this, and then the short of it, and you get into the detail of the trip. By the way, if anybody wants to read something that is more fascinating than anything you could see in a movie, or as the life of Christopher Columbus is just unbelievably interesting and important. Columbus was a very dedicated Catholic who his whole purpose was not to discover the route and make money. His purpose was to discover a route to make money so that he could re-engage to relieve Jerusalem and retake Jerusalem. That was what he wanted. It had a Catholic purpose. That was his intention. So of course, that was kind of the Queen's and the King's intention, until when he finally did discover it and they learned that maybe there's some money to be made. Ultimately, their objective became more money and less Catholic. The King and Queen of Spain had a whole, their reason initially was to bring the word of God and the Catholic religion to whomever this endeavor would take them, which they didn't know it would be brand new people in a brand new world, not the people who were brought to the attention of the old world by prior people, including Marco Polo, another Italian. So he made the trip. He discovered all of these new peoples. He landed on October 12th, 1492. By the way, that's not his birthday. That's the day he landed. Nobody knows his birthday. He was a man that came up, changed the entire world, and his life ended in 1506 when he died from the damages that he suffered and the travails that he suffered, because he incurred all kinds of disease, and ultimately he died in 1506, probably from a disease called shigellosis, which you get from bad water. So I made my little quip in the essay. Probably the first time in history, "Don't drink the water" was something you say to people who travel. But then, so I'll get to the nub of it. We can work backwards. He came across these peoples. The first island he landed on was San Salvador, and San Salvador he met people who were comely. They were good looking. They were pleasant. They were intelligent. They were called Taino. The Taino people were an Indian race of people who weren't Negro. They weren't Caucasian. They were a light-skinned, intelligent group of people who are anthropologically, it became learned. And by the way, in one of the books I use is 1491 and 1493. The anthropology of those peoples is in those books. So it's an incredible way to figure out how did those people get there in the first place. Some came across the Bering Strait. That's one group of quote Indians. The Indian being Indian is because Christopher Columbus thought he landed in India. And then there was another group of people who came up from the south. They came probably from all of the islands through Australia, and they came into the southern part of South America, migrated north up to about as far as the Caribbean, which is really fascinating and interesting. So when you're talking about people, you're talking about peoples that are subjugated. They weren't African. They weren't black. History, slavery. I think slavery probably started with Cain and Abel, for goodness sakes. Throughout history, people would have wars with other people. They'd capture them, they'd either sell them, they'd use them, and they'd turn them into slaves. It was the system. If you won the war, you got them, the other guy as slaves. If they won the war, they got you as slaves. It was how the world worked for thousands of years. Slavery still exists today. People are still bought and sold. And unfortunately, and principally, and illogically, probably mostly Africa. So,
You know what's funny? You know what's funny, Ernie, is that the very same people who are tearing down statues and calling everybody slave owners and racist and this blah, 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 are the same people that turn a blind eye to the slavery that exists in the world right now. You know, so it's amazing.
remember,
So Joe, you had a question about slavery, I thought, is that right?
Yeah, I just finish the concept. Let me just finish the one concept about racism. It's racism that's the issue. It's not slavery. Slavery has always existed. It still exists. And by the way, the origin of the word slave comes from white people who were put into slavery. Slavic people, Slav, slave. The Russians were almost eradicated by the Bulgars because so many of them were turned into slaves. There was almost not enough Russian people to make a Russian continent. So slavery pre-existed. So they're not talking about the black, when they talk about somebody's life matters, they're talking about racism. And racism was invented because after the Great Contact, and the essays talk about, the second essay talks about a contact, which is 1492. And the analogy is to Pangea. Pangea was when the landmass of the earth was only one landmass, and it broke off, and it formed many continents, including Africa on one side and the Americas on the other side. And they formed separate diseases. They formed separate foods and separate cultures, and even not separate races, but separate kinds of people. And when Christopher Columbus landed on San Salvador, and these authors, the professors who wrote the articles that I use in the book, the theses that I use in my essays, he in effect created, in the words of these educated and learned investigators of the facts, he created the most important fact that has ever existed in the history of man. Just put it in some context. The most important human in history, at least the history of which we're familiar, which is Western culture, is Christopher Columbus. So you wonder, well, why are they taking Christopher Columbus on? Because if you can take down the king, you're the king. I mean, why go after the little guy? Go after the big guy. The big guy, the biggest guy in history is Christopher Columbus. By the way, he's my second favorite guy. My first favorite guy is George Washington. They're taking him on too. George Washington, at least owned slaves. Christopher Columbus never owned a slave. Christopher Columbus was not an owner of slaves. Christopher Columbus created the new Pangea. He brought the old world and the new world together again, like Pangea. By the way, most of us are Italian in we're all Italian in my club. I will thank Christopher Columbus for only one thing that he did. He brought the tomato to Europe. Thank God. Sunday pasta without Christopher Columbus, there wouldn't be. So
Ernie, I got meatballs and some pork going right now in my gravy.
Okay, the gravy. So down. I got it. Okay, because the gravy is something that is, it's not sauce. Sauce is for sissies. Gravy is what we ate.
I'm sure Christopher Columbus called it gravy too.
Yeah, well, I don't think his sauce was as good as my mother's, but that's another story.
With what you just said, Ernie, why do people confuse slavery and link it to Columbus? I want to set the record straight here on his legacy. Why are they linking him to slavery? You just said very clearly he never owned a slave.
But to the malignant, narcissistic nihilist, that doesn't matter. Facts don't matter. They're in the business of destroying things. The whole point of this is to destroy the legacy, which is the legacies of peoples, which is the basis for their civilization. They picked Columbus. They shouldn't have picked him. Maybe they should have figured out they're whacking the major icon of Italian guys. We don't like when they do that. They better be careful because we whack back. And my view of whacking back, at least as you know, as a member of the bar, is to have the facts, to own the facts. We own the facts. The fact is, he was never a racist. Racism was invented only because after the contact occurred, so many people died from the diseases that happened. Up to 80 and 90% of some of the populations died from the diseases. So they couldn't make slaves out of them. The only way that they could man the fields from all the things that were forming these new economies, like tobacco was being grown here, cotton was being grown here. Sugar. It all started with sugar. Sugar was something that they loved in Europe. They grew it in the islands, and they needed a lot of labor, and there was no labor. They couldn't make the Taino or the indigenous natives do it because they were either dead or they wouldn't do it. They were not the type of people who would become slaves. They wouldn't let themselves. In one instance, you see, rather than do that, they killed themselves. They wouldn't do it. So where do you go to get people to make good slaves? Well, the Portuguese had already done it. The Dutch had already done it. Hey, let's go to the Africans because that's down the street from Portugal and it's not too far from the New World. Let's go get some of these African slaves for two reasons. One, they're in the neighborhood. Two, the Africans themselves made a slave trade. They didn't go and capture black people in the middle of the jungle. Give me a break. These people could kill lions and tigers. They'll kill some Dutchman and they'll kill some Portuguese guy pretty quickly. But that wasn't it. They brought their ships up and the slaves were already pre-captured, pre-chained. They sold them. They made a negotiation, put them in a boat and took off with them. So the concept of a slave was the black slave trade was an industry of black people, and for the very same reason that the New World had slaves, the Old World had slaves, and that is Africa was always tribal. This tribe captured that tribe, they turned them into slaves, just like in Europe. Maybe not exactly the same, but almost identical. They sold each other off if they lost a war, or if they were considered to be inferior peoples, like with the modern slavery, as if you refuse to become a Christian, they can make you a slave. That was another one. Or if you were some kind of considered to be something that was too perverse for society, they'd make you into a slave. That's the underpinning of it. It's gotten. Your question is, well, why would they do this? Because they can, because nobody does anything to stop it. It doesn't matter what the facts are.
Well, that's why we're here. But Ernie, that's
facts. They don't care about facts.
But that's why we're here at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Resinello, joined by Ernie Nuzzo. We're setting the record straight on Christopher Columbus. We're getting into the meat and potatoes of it. Please follow Joe and I on Facebook and YouTube at the front line with Joe and Joe. Share this video. It's going to be titled Setting the Record Straight on Christopher Columbus with Ernie Nuzzo. Share it with your friends, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. So Joe, go ahead. I know you had another question.
Yeah, basically, a lot of times detractors try to minimize Columbus's achievements. They basically bring up, the Nordic expansion, Leif Erikson. Basically, in your thesis or in your essays, you talked about this idea of first to set foot on, in quotations, and you basically state that this should be eliminated. Could you talk a little bit about that and to talk about the detraction of Columbus with regard to being the first to set foot on the Americas?
Well, the reason for those particular words, Joe, is just before I met you, a group of detractors were saying Leif Erikson was the first to step on. By the way, there's no history that demonstrates the actual fact of that. Did Leif Erikson actually, over the course of years, follow he was a Nordic, I think it was Norway actually, and take his rowboats and go along and get into Greenland and to Iceland? Yeah, he did. Did he discover those places? I don't think so. There was already people there. Did he ever reach Canada? There's a lot of people that say he did. There's no evidence that he actually did. But get to the nub of it. Let's assume that he landed in Florida, which everybody knows he didn't. There's no way that he got all the way to Florida coming along the coast, because he would have been dead from old age just to get as far as he would have gotten, just to get to the northern part of Canada. Then how did he discover it? It's like the bear crap in the woods. No, if nobody ever heard of it. Did he discover the New World? Not if it had zero impact, that it didn't change the world. Christopher Columbus landed in 1492, and there was world trade almost starting before he died in 1506. And it was like the authors of the treatises that I used to create these essays. The world changed because of his activities and his discoveries that he actually brought back. He created the technology to do it. The technology was his charts. He created the ability to do it. And wow, by the way, he did this trip 4 times. And each time more and more crews that he trained were coming and multiplying the impact. It isn't just him going back with 3 ships 3 times. There were like dozens and sometimes hundreds of ships making the trip. Now, was that discovery? Of course, immediately thereafter, the impact of it changed the world, and it changed the world immediately. Even though he personally didn't know that he discovered the New World, he died too soon to figure that out. He changed the world. By the way, some of the people that detract.
Ernie, a lot of histories have been written.
Go ahead, Joe.
I didn't hear him.
There's been a lot of histories written about Columbus. Clearly, sadly, I think his detractors have read the wrong histories. The one that you note in your essays is Admiral of the Sea by Samuel Eliot Morris as the authoritarian.
Morris.
And just to give people a little background, Harvard University, Morris's work was financed by Harvard, the Carnegie Foundation, as well as the Mellon Foundation. So it's, I think a very good golden source. Could you talk about how that work by Morrison is relevant to this conversation?
Well, what Morrison did, by the way, this is the book. He was a professor at Harvard University. Wrote the book in 1941. Just happens to be the year I was born, so maybe there's a little bit of God wink in that one. But he wrote. When you say he wrote the book, he did the academic work. He went to the original sources. And in my profession, there's admissible evidence and there's not admissible evidence. He went to the sources of the information. He went to the archives. There's an archival history of Christopher Columbus. There's not a lot of history of Columbus, but there's a large archival history of Columbus. And the archives include his charts. He kept meticulous journals, because when he wrote his journals, he was writing them to his sovereigns. He was writing to them what he was doing. It was a daily diary of what he did, where he went, and how he did it. He wrote down even stuff that you would say, well, why would he write that down? He's kind of mocking himself because he was a good Catholic man. He wasn't going to go to hell because he's going to lie to his sovereigns. There's countries that the Vatican had records. Like when you're sending large amounts of ships, you've got business records, buying ships, selling ships, who's the people involved. Those are the basis upon which these books are written. During Columbus's trips, he had people who got aboard these trips, these 4 trips that he made, and some of the people were just awful people. Some of them were criminals who would be pardoned if they'd go, because these people didn't know that they were discovering a new world. They were just going. They were going west, where up until not up until even then, people thought that you'd fall off the world, even though Aristotle knew better. So he would. I'm going to. So the information is archival. While he was on his trips, he had mutinies. He had people who stole his records. Amerigo Vespucci changed his records and Amerigo Vespucci put his name on some of Columbus's documents, that he would become America, not Columbia. And by the way, even the presidents of the United States, including John Quincy Adams and John Adams, knew better, and certainly Thomas Jefferson knew better. They thought he was screwed, just the same as I think he was screwed, and I'm sure you do. So if we call ourselves America, what a shame. That's a fiction. It shouldn't be. We should be Columbia. So these people who maligned him, they tried to steal his intellectual product, which is the discoveries, the charts, and the positions. Remember something key. They did it because they couldn't stand him for 3 reasons. They were jealous, they were small, or they hated him because he was Italian. They didn't like Italians. Like I used in my essay, he was the first WAP. Of course, the without papers part of it came centuries later. So they didn't like him for that. The sovereigns liked him because they knew he was absolutely unique. His sovereigns respected him. While he was sick in the New World, one of his mutineers took his ships, sailed back to Spain, and brought lawsuits against them, filing all kinds of perjurious, unsustainable documents, like fake news today, only with a vengeance. These people were crazier than anything you can see on television today. And that became the written predicate for people writing books. Crap sitting on top of crap is crap. It's not original entry. It's not admissible. It has no validity. But that is how the documentation. You find somebody that writes a garbage book, and then you find 17 people who hate his guts that cite to the garbage book, and you're citing garbage to garbage to garbage, garbage in, garbage out. That is how it happened. By the way, that happened hundreds of years after he died, after he became the world's recognized leader in the history of the New World. People who had a reason to try to set that aside would just go back to what written history there was, but it's not history. It's fiction.
Well, that's the reason why we're here at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Resinello, with Ernie Nuzzo, debunking some of the myths about Columbus, setting the record straight. Speaking of which, this is one that really, Ernie, I mean, I don't know why. Joe and I have a lot of opinions. We're Italian. We have opinions, okay? And we are chiacchierones. We'll keep talking, all right? But here's the thing. We back up everything we say. When we make an assertion, when we offer an opinion, we offer something to back it up, okay? One of the things that you never see is when people make ridiculous statements. They don't seem to back them up because the statements are ridiculous and they're easily refuted. So we're spoon-fed, Ernie, this narrative that the indigenous people, let's get to the Caribbean a little bit. The indigenous people of the Americas were peace-loving people who were taught violence and barbarity by the evil Europeans, and sticking with just the people of the Caribbean islands. Please tell our audience about some of these groups. Now, we do know, because of your essay and other sources, that many of the people were peace-loving people, but not all of them. So talk to us a little bit about them. Maybe use the example of the Caribs. Give an example of who they were and how they operated before the evil Columbus ever got to that area.
Well, let's start off with when he first landed. He landed and came upon the Taino, and they were a cultured, intelligent, peaceful civilization. But and they pretty much had a chunk of the Caribbean. But how did they get there? and they were all of those things. Well, they just ran over the Siboney. Another group of people who were there before them. I don't know if the books aren't perfectly clear because I don't think they absolutely know, but the Siboney was there, Siboney, and they took over from the Siboney, who was no longer there. So that's the world. That was humanity. That was humanity going back thousands of years. In 1492, the world didn't become 100% glorious and nice. It was still man eat man, the blind lead the blind. It was what it was. But in the context of equating, you have to equate. There's no perfection. The only perfection died on a cross. Everything else is not perfection. All right. So the Siboney got run over while Columbus was working with the Siboney, including Don Diego, who was a Taino young man that became his interpreter. He taught him English. He taught him Spanish, and traveled with him to help him be interpreter when he's going from island to island. That young man took baptism, became a Catholic. He thus becomes a citizen of Spain. That's what it took. He's a citizen of Spain. He was presented to the court of his sovereigns. He was accepted, and he became known as Don Diego Colon. And Christopher Columbus, in the context of that relationship, didn't formally adopt him. They didn't have that legality, but Christopher Columbus made him his son. So much for racism. He made this Taino boy his son. Now, while he was going around, some of the Tainos were being set upon by savages you call them Caribs. What the name was to each other. The Taino called them cannibali. That's the word for cannibal. Why? So the English word for cannibal is the Taino word cannibali, because they used to eat people. They would capture them and eat them. They would capture their women, make them have babies and eat the babies. Even in the 1492, that would be a little bit over the top. Civilization came a lot further than that.
Yeah, I don't imagine which one's worse, being enslaved or getting eaten. But go ahead.
Well, I think there's a metaphorical eating and there's a physical eating. Maybe if you're going to be a slave, you may have wanted to be eaten, depending on how badly you were treated when you were a slave. Mm-hmm. And which is a whole nother set of conversation, because there's a whole lot to be said for if this is an item of value, why would you beat it into a pulp and it becomes of no value? But that's another discourse, another concept. But
I'm glad you're getting into it, because it is important to note that a lot of these, you call them, and that's what they are, nihilists, anarchists. Nowadays, they want to judge the people in 1492, at that time by let's say modern standards. Again, these are usually moral relativists, so we don't know what standards they're employing. But they want to judge them. But my whole point is not to criticize the people of the Caribbean. And that's why I'm asking you the question, is because you have to understand, and we need to emphasize this to people. Fallen humanity, everybody in the world, every group in the world, no matter if you were, let's say, the white Europeans, okay, if you were in sub-Saharan Africa, as you pointed out, enslaving other tribes, if you were in the Caribbean and you were being cannibalized by the Caribs, okay, the world's a fallen place. Are we so much better off in 2020 than, let's say, we were 500 years ago? Are we so advanced and so civilized that we could actually judge people from 500 years ago? I don't think so. That's why I brought up the question, Ernie, because people need to get that through their head. In other words, like you said, where are you going to find perfection? He died 2,000 years ago on the cross. Everybody else is fallen. Everybody. I believe
that we have a modern day equivalent of cannibali. It's called the morons that want to burn down our country. They're cannibali. They're eating our culture. They're eating our history. They're trying to do away with both so that they could create their culture and their history. They're demonstrating no culture. They're demonstrating no history. All they're demonstrating is that they could pull things down, but there's never a discussion of what they want to put in its place. So So we were early on in the takeover of the United States. First, you got to break it before you can fix it. That was Karl Marx said that. You got to break it to fix it. All of these savages, that word fits. All of these cannibals, modern day, their job is to eat what we are and then put something in its place that you and I have no clue what they're talking about.
No.
Ernie, you talked about the great contact in the very beginning of our conversation. Could you elaborate on that idea, both from a positive and negative effect on this discussion?
Well, the handsome Joe, let me say this. Some of the professors that I referenced, this was in the essays of 1491 and 1493. I have it all in the treatise. Columbus's voyage did not mark the discovery of a new world, but its creation. What happened after Columbus was nothing less than the forming of a single new world from the collision of two old worlds. And then one more sentence. Of all the men, now here, this is the one that just blows my brains out. Of all the members of humankind who ever walked the earth, he alone, Columbus, inaugurated a new era in the history of life. Now that's the guy they want to take down the statue. And well, let's say he owned 67,000 slaves and killed 50 trillion people. He didn't do anything of the sort. He died after he made his discoveries. The conquistadors, he didn't create them. They came later, sometimes during too. Some of these guys that became conquistadors. Pizarro, Cortez. Oh, and by the way, guess who they married?
The indigenous women.
Indigenous women. Okay? Guess who they married? And then when they brought over black slaves, which got mixed in, they brought a lot of them, and who got all mixed in, guess who they married? Because, just so you understand, race had nothing to do with it. Race had nothing to do with it. The Spanish intermarried with everybody. It just kind of like the Southern Italians did. That was the way of the world. You found a woman, she was handsome, you liked her, you married her. Who gave a crap what her race was? That was invented in order to justify what they were doing to the Africans. It became they had to dehumanize them in order to justify in their own minds what they were doing. So, and Christopher Columbus, that violated everything he stood for. That violated every precept that he had. Oh, and by the way, slavery was illegal in Castile. While Columbus was alive, slavery was illegal in Castile. He died. They sort of changed that when they needed more people to man the sugar plantations and then the tobacco plantations, but more importantly, to mine the silver and gold that they found, huge amounts of silver and gold, which became the specie, the money. The whole world accepted silver and gold. In India, in China, the entire world took silver and gold. So when one of those early Spanish people would land and bring gold and silver, they traded all over the place. World globalization began in 1492 when Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. So these people who are trying to burn buildings, they're globalists. Well, why would they pull Columbus' statue down? He was the first globalist. He was the first guy that created globalism. He invented it.
What did, along the lines of what Joe was asking, Ernie, just very briefly, because we're going to get to the next question, but what were some of we always hear about the negative of the Great Contact. We always hear about disease, rats, things like that.
Joe, it went both ways. The diseases of the New World made its way to the Old World, and millions died in the Old World.
And believe me, again, in fairness, I wish people would realize that. But and we always hear about that. What were some of the mutually beneficial effects of the Great Contact? Because we're always hearing the Europeans came, exploited the labor, took the natural resources, and there was no benefit. What were the mutually beneficial effects of the Great Contact?
All right, let's just take the one that is fairly. There were no horses in the New World. What did the American plainsmen survive with? horses. So when so when Lewis and Clark made their way to the Pacific, they found that the Indians had horses. Where did the horses come from? Well, they came
Elizabeth
from
Warren,
Columbus.
Ernie.
Huh?
I think it was Elizabeth Warren they came from.
Yeah, her ancestors bought the
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, she's a very fine, upstanding Indian woman. I understand that. But just start with the horse. The horse. They didn't have horses. It changed the New World because every culture in the New World ended up being a horse culture. It was how they developed their cultures. Cattle. There was no cattle. But that was a source of food, a source of milk. There was no kid. There was like goats. So there's animals that they brought over. They brought over sugar cane. They brought over tobacco. They brought over a slew of things of foods and plants that were not known to the New World. But the reverse was even more true because the old world was looking for some of the stuff. I'm wrong about tobacco came from the old world. The first commercial worldwide product was tobacco. And within only a few short years after Columbus died, tobacco was sold all around the world because every single culture got off on it. Because it was addictive, but nobody knew it at the time. All the kings and queens wanted it, and it became a cash crop for the old world. The New World wanted it. We're willing to spend money on it, and the gold and silver, which was mined in the South America and in Mexico. Mexico was the largest cache of silver in the world. Immediately there was an international economy because they had. You can't. I'll transfer. I'll give you this cow. You give me 16 pounds. How are you going to do that when it takes a month and a half to get across the water on a ship? They did it with gold and silver, and they didn't need to have to countersend things. You send me this, I give you gold and silver. That came from Christopher Columbus finding. By the way, Christopher Columbus never found all the gold that he wanted. He died too soon. But shortly after he died, he found the places where the gold was. He didn't live long enough to go out and capture the money from it. He was dead. All that money was captured by the morons that followed him. I mean, when I say the morons, the ones that were mutinying on him, and then of course all of the cultures that came since, including Portugal, who ended up taking a part of the action. The Pope whacked up the New World into your half and my half. The Spanish versus the Portuguese. And the Portuguese were doing exactly, shortly after Columbus, they were out with their ships, and they recognized, by the way, the King of Portugal recognized Columbus's incredible, now Spanish hated the Portuguese hated the Spanish, but they were intellectually honest, which is, of course, the people we're dealing with today are not. The King of Portugal said, I just want you to know, I should have listened to you. You have made a fantastic discovery. The King of Portugal acknowledging that the Spanish king got over on him and acknowledged it to the whole world. That's how important Columbus was. At his time in life, he was mocked by people and the detractors. The kings of those countries recognized that he was insanely important. He changed the world, and he did. He changed the world.
Ernie,
He died before the bad stuff happened.
You talked a little bit about, Columbus's Catholic faith, that it was central to his mission. A lot of people today, they talk about the fact, that Columbus forced his faith on the natives. Could we kind of clear that up a little bit with regard to, what his idea was to spread the gospel and how he did just that? Okay. The archives will demonstrate Christopher Columbus's writings. The very first trip, the very first island, the second island, some of his guys thought it would be a great idea. Let's go rape some of these women. Oh, by the way, that's the one thing. I'll go back. Rape. There was no need to rape. The natives were promiscuous. Everybody screwed everybody. You didn't have to rape them. Okay, so that was just the condition of the world that it existed. But Columbus didn't want his men to be doing it because he was a Catholic man. He instructed his people to be fair and kind to the natives, and because in deference to the fact
that they will be good to the sovereigns. He took horses, but he also took priests. Why did he bring priests? What was their job? To do mass on the ship? To do mass for 30 guys on a ship? No. Their job was to proselytize the Catholic faith and to make Catholics. By the way, the Taínos were thoroughly available to take on the Christian faith. They took on the Christian faith. Some of the bad people on this are the priests that went. They were not New World people. They were Old World people. They did not think, and they thought that these people were less than human. And Christopher Columbus did not. They were not successful in Christianizing the natives, because if they were, we wouldn't have had what happened, because you can't beat up on a Christian Spanish citizen. It eliminated the issue because race had nothing to do with it. As one commenter said, who wrote at the time, the issue was not race, it was culture. The inferiority was culture inferiority. You hated somebody's culture. You didn't hate the color of their skin.
Ernie, I think it's important. Sadly, we have all these movements nowadays. They're trying to cancel out history. Could you talk a little bit about that from your perspective as well as your essays? I mean, I think it's very important from a historical perspective to basically learn from mistakes. That's how we grow as a people and as a society. But talk to us about the negative aspects of people, which we're seeing today, trying to cancel history.
Well, remember what we talked about earlier.
Which they're trying to do to Columbus.
They're doing a good job. You also notice they're taking on my hero, which is George Washington, who had slaves. The first and only founder of America who gave up all of his slaves. He didn't want slavery. He wanted to do away with slavery. One of the things I just read, I'm reading another book about Washington, and I didn't understand it. When we was talking about Washington and Hamilton had a commercial bent and not an agrarian bent. The agriculture needed slavery. Hamilton hated slavery. Hamilton came from the Caribbean. That's where he was born. And George Washington set up the first American economy to make sure that if what he conceived could happen, that we would have a civil war, because he anticipated it. The North would win because the thrust of the growth of the country would be in the North, based upon a non-slave economy. George Washington didn't put himself into poverty with slavery, but he lost loads and loads of money because he didn't do what slavers do. He never sold his slaves. He let them marry. He never separated them. It became, he in effect was subsidizing slaves. Now, the issue of what these people are doing. You start at one word is they're revisionists. I mean, like that word means that you judge somebody by standards of a modern era versus 550 years ago. At least slavery in this country was ended in 1864 with the Emancipation Proclamation. 1864 versus 1500. It's called revisionism. That is by definition, Joe. That is intellectual dishonesty, and that's the nice word. Remember who we're dealing with. We're dealing with Marxist nihilists who started in the 1920s to capture the universities, to capture the professorships. They stuck their morons into what we now call the swamp, into government. And these are people in control. It doesn't matter what the truth is. They don't give a damn about the truth. I did these essays because it wasn't. I did this essay for more than a year and a half ago, and then I've been revising it. The whole point of this was to have an intellectually honest, factual predicate to teach from. to do courses on. Well, we're not going to be doing teaching and courses while they're pulling the statutes down and burning buildings. Something a lot more significant has to be done. It would be nice if all of a sudden they would say, the guys who are out there pulling a statue down would say, oh, Ernie Nuzzo wrote a treatise and it said that what we're doing is intellectually dishonest. I think we're going to leave now. That's ludicrous. That's not what they're there for. So if you're trying to understand intellectually and rationally why they're doing what they're doing, you're not dealing in intellectualism, you're not dealing in rationality. You're dealing in pure, unadulterated hate and power. And these people are automatons who have been programmed to the a priori of life, not the a posteriori. Everything is 1 and 1 is 2. There shall be 2 senators from each state. Life is that simple to them. You're evil, I'm good, this is bad, this is good. And they're taught that, and they're like the Red Book of Mao. I read the Red Book of Mao. I now know everything about the universe, and I am right and you are wrong, and I'll kill you if you disagree with me. That's where we are. Well, hopefully my treatise will be beneficial one day when we're going to try to teach the kids about what the truth is. But right now, there's no teaching these people. They're too busy destroying.
Well, you're not going to teach these people. Look, they're true believers. They're Marxists. They want to tear down. Joe and I, again, Columbus is just he's a casualty of the culture war. Our view is very simple. When we look at the larger picture, is the Marxists, they want to restart history. We know that going back to the French Revolution. We know that right up to all the revolutions. We know it in Cambodia and China, the Soviet Union. They want to start history all over again. But why? Because fundamental, you just said nihilist. Fundamentally, Marxists are atheists. I never thought that they were atheists. I think they absolutely believe in God. They simply reject God. And one of the reasons why they want to destroy Western civilization, again, this is something Joe and I have spoken about numerous times on the show. They want to destroy Western civilization because Western civilization was built by the Catholic Church on the ruins of the Roman Empire. It's that simple. And they will destroy that civilization at all costs. And we made, not that it was a genius prediction, we made a prediction on our show. Columbus, George Washington, Robert E. Lee, that's just the start. Their ultimate icon that has to come down is the cross that sits on top every Catholic church. What happened recently since I first got introduced to you, Ernie, in the last month and a half? BLM and Sean King, they're calling for statues of Jesus and Mary to come down. In other words, and those statues have been desecrated. Okay, so it says exactly what's going on. People need to that's why we wanted to have you on to yes, set the record straight about Columbus, but also to put it in context of the culture war. The way we fight back, Ernie, like you said, we don't punch them in the face. You write an essay, other people write, set the record straight, and you go on social media and you go and broadcast it and you go and shout it from the rooftops that these people are lying. That's the way you fight them. And then with political power too, defund the universities if they don't have diversification in their philosophy department, in their history department, in their English department. If you're not showing diversity of thought, we will defund you. That's what should happen in this country. In other words, it's a bare knuckle fight. It's a bare knuckle fight. Why are we fighting with boxing gloves on? Take the gloves off and fight them. Fight them in bare knuckles.
Because, but Joe, you got to understand. I'm not sure there's. I mean, this insanity is working in our favor because nobody really realized how insane these people are. But the concept of what they're doing is ancient. A little blurb I make in the essay is Queen Nefertiti of 5,000 years ago in Egyptian history. She and her husband was Agamemnon. They were hated by the priests of their era. So when they died, the priests erased their history. Now it wasn't like an eraser. They had people sent all over Egypt with chisels and hammers, and they chiseled off every reference to Agamemnon and Nefertiti. They virtually wiped out any known history of the history knows those two people. They knew that they were the king and queen of Egypt, but they know very little more because the priests of ancient Egypt are like the nihilists of today, except they just did it by carving off the written record of these people. So therefore, if there's no record of them, then they don't exist. Did the bear crap in the woods? Did the bear crap in the woods? No. If you never even knew there was a bear and you never know there was any woods, then how could you carry forth with that? So the concept is an ancient concept. They're doing ancient stuff, and we're allowing it. We're allowing it, and the insanity is that the political will isn't there yet. I think I could sense it. Not one further dollar should go to any university. Not one further cent should go to any research from those universities, from the federal government. If these people, if you can demonstrate that they're not teaching people both sides of the story. I personally believe the universities have failed us. I personally believe the press has failed us. And I personally believe unless we can make people understand, I'm only talking about Columbus. But Columbus actually is a metaphor, isn't he? I could stick Hamilton in here. I could stick Jefferson in there. I could stick Mussolini in there. I could put anybody in there. If you want them gone, if you're going to subject them to this nonsensical revisionism and re-revisionism, then do it with impunity. Are they going to wait until November the 4th to send in the fire trucks and hose down Portland? It's like there's no solution if there's no will if there's no will. And I recognize the dilemma. Why did they start this? Some cop put his neck on a black guy and which was evil, and it didn't matter. Everybody recognized that was evil. That just became the excuse at this moment in history to try to affect the political will by affecting and impacting our democracy. They hate our democracy. That's why if it wasn't, because downtown Newark, downtown Oshkosh, some cop or some person's going to do something. Why? Because 365 million people, you're going to find an excuse. It's an excuse. That was the soup du jour, the excuse du jour. And that's how come. And the political will is not there. Maybe eventually the people of the liberal people who are from the West Coast are going to get it, because now they're coming at their houses now. But in the meanwhile, until and unless there's the political will, this is going to perpetuate itself. I'm a lover of history. I'm a student of history. I didn't do it for a living. I did it out of a passion for it. And there's no history if there's no truth in history. Otherwise it's Aesop fables. It's not history.
Ernie, just to put a finer point on our conversation, how does this all end? Do we see an end to iconoclasm? Does America regain her stature in this country as well as in the world? Does Donald Trump prove to be victorious over these leftist monsters?
Well, see, I'm not a political guy, but Ernie. I'm not speaking for the Colombians at this moment because it's Ernie, the former attorney, the retired attorney. I believe the answer is everything that we are is still there. They're attacking the Constitution. Second Amendment doesn't count. Frankly, if you want to attack the Second Amendment, let's attack 1/3 of the First Amendment. If these people are not the press, but they are a wing of the Democrat or the liberal wing of a radical political process, then they're not the press. So if they're not the press, they're not protected. And by the way, I always believe if you punch me in the face, I'm going to punch you in your face. All I see is the punching coming in one direction. So the answer is, I think until the election, and I hope it turns out well. And I think you sense where I am on that side of it. Because if it comes out otherwise, I truly think that we're going to have we're going to have a new version of a digital culture war. It's going to be another civil war. It's going to be the continuation of the Civil War, and it won't be North-South, slavery, non-slavery. It's going to be left versus right, ideologies of politics and governance. And if you guys come from a Christian point of view, they're going to be taking away the third of the Trinity of the First Amendment. They're going to do away with religion, and they're going to find a way to do it because they're going to just put all kinds of people on the courts that make decisions that are evil and bad. Marbury versus Madison, back when at the time of Thomas Jefferson, is they made the courts be the ultimate arbiters of what's legal and illegal. And you can see during this last couple of months, the courts are making some absurd decisions.
Mhm.
I mean, ridiculous decisions. Why? Because, well, they were the judges that Obama appointed. Well, it's an insanity. You're supposed to be I clerked for a federal judge, and I know what his politics were, and I know that when he was taking on a case, politics had nothing to do with it. He made a decision based upon the law. Well, these people are not so intellectually honest. These people are driven with a narrative, and they got themselves on courts. They got themselves in attorney generalships. And who's financing all of this? I'm waiting for the FBI to come out with the bull on that one. I hope somebody's watching the store, because because pallets of bricks just don't show up on a sidewalk at strategic levels of a city where people are walking down, picking them off a pallet and throwing them at cops. That's somebody funded that, somebody orchestrated that, somebody did that. So where am I going with this? Until we get the political will and somebody punches back, it's going to continue.
Joe, if you don't have anything else,
No, I think that's a perfect way to end it, Ernie. I think, to be honest with you, I think you basically summarized the whole conversation, and frankly, we share your view. It's a scary world, and frankly, sadly, many people support this cause and aren't thinking it through. They're simply not seeing it clearly. They're threatening America, one of the greatest, if not the greatest civilizations that ever basically sat on the face of the earth. And it saddens me for my 4 children.
well, let's.
I would just add one thing. I am a member of the Colombians, which is a 501c3 charity, and the Hackensack is our address, but we're all over Bergen County and Passaic County, even part of the lower part of New York. And we have, I just happen to chair the Columbus Legacy Project. And this was done, this essays were drawn to educate my own people. I mean, when I'm reading the books to write this stuff, I wasn't a Columbus scholar. Quite the contrary. I still am not. I don't claim to be. I'm writing essays. I'm not writing theses. We've done the work. I don't know if you can see it through the thing, but it's here. If anybody is interested in what's in here, they can come. They can let you know, and you'll talk to us. We'll see what we can do about getting out the information. It's sitting here on my desk. I've done it. It's not 5 or 6 of these, because this was actually a 5-volume set. Who could read that? It took me a year and a half to read it and synthesize it and write it up and to put it into English and at the Ernie written level, which I think is understandable. And it is available, and we'll talk about it, because that would be the Colombians' contribution to what we're doing.
Well, that's a great place to leave it, Ernie. I think that's the way we do it in the culture war. You want to fight with the greatest bare knuckle punch there is, which is the truth. Tell the truth of things, explain the truth to people, encourage people to look beyond the ideology, to look beyond the people that are spoon feeding them ideas. Go read history for yourself, and please, by all means, when you discover the truth, speak it clearly, speak it boldly. Ernie Nuzzo, thank you for joining us here at the Front Line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. Remember to follow Joe and I on Facebook and YouTube at the Front Line with Joe and Joe. Please like, subscribe, share, hit that little bell on YouTube. We're told that's very important, so please do that. And remember till the next time that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for